Agwina Ushla, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Captain Noel Carey, retired, to address the Assembly on behalf of the Jadotville veterans.
Minister, Chief of Staff, distinguished guests, veterans of A Company, families and friends. This is a historic day for the veterans of A Company as we remember our comrades who are no longer with us and remember our illustrious leader and commander, Commandant Pat Quinlan. "56 years ago, in September, those of you who will remember only too well, we had orders to move to a town called Jadotville, which we had never heard of, 90 miles away from our base in Elizabethville. And our mission, described to us by Commandant Quinlan, was to protect the local population because there was rumours that there would be riots in the town. We were rushed to Jadotville, not in our own transport because we didn't have any transport. The Swedish contingent had to drive us there and leave us there, 90 miles away from our base. In doing so, they left behind our heavy mortars and our emergency rations. When we arrived in Jadotville, we were not well received, and very shortly afterwards, the Katangan troops started to move into our area, driving through our positions and goading us to fire on them. We didn't know what was happening in Elizabethville. Nobody told us what was happening, and there was a major operation about to take place. Commandant Quinlan begged for information, and he was refused, but told to stay where he was, everything would be okay. Like the true Kerryman he was suspicious that something was happening, and he gave orders for all of us to dig in. And I'm sure my comrades here will remember in the broiling heat, trying to dig in very hard ground to protect ourselves. That one decision alone means that 150 of his troops were still alive at the end of that battle. Within 2 or 3 days, we were surrounded by a force of something like 2,000 Katangan forces, well armed, well disciplined, and they were soldiers, propped up by some hundreds of mercenaries, Belgian, French, and South African. We were blocked at the Lufira Bridge, which was the only access into and out of Jadotville. Commandant Quinlan, on many occasions, asked headquarters to give him the right to pull out, and he was told, stay there, all would be well. All was not well. Very shortly afterwards, and just remember, we were peacekeepers. We went as peacekeepers. And that's the great efforts that our soldiers are making all over the world today in peacekeeping. We were the peacekeepers, but suddenly we were surrounded, we were blocked, our trucks could not get, our ration trucks could not get into us, and again, we were not told exactly what was happening. Suddenly, on the 13th of September, and my colleagues will remember it only too well, we were bombed by a jet fuga of the Katangan Air Force, of which we had absolutely no knowledge. We were bombed strafed, machine gunned, and martyred for the next week. Young soldiers, first time in action, average age 18 and a half years. Over that period, obviously our water had been cut because we were relying on the local supply of water at that stage. So for most of that action, we literally had no water. We had very little food, our ammunition was low, and then we were told, to our great joy, that our relief force of B Company would be at the Lufira Bridge on the Saturday morning and rescue was at hand. Indeed, I remember talking to Sean Foley, and we were talking about how we would honour these lads arriving and would we have a guard of honour for them. Unfortunately, they never got across the Lufira Bridge for various reasons. We had depended on them to break through to us, to resupply us, and now our ammunition was practically gone. Our heavy weapons were out of action, and we were left in a situation where we could not break through ourselves because, as I said, we did not have enough transport to get us back to the Lufira Bridge and back to Elizabethville. And at the end of that week, all of our lads were tired, exhausted, but to our great joy, the Katangans asked for a ceasefire, which was readily granted by our illustrious commander, a brilliant commander, Commandant Pat Quinlan. Ceasefire only lasted while our troops were at the Lufira Bridge. Once the relief column failed to get through, we were now in an impossible situation. We were surrounded by more and more troops who moved into our area, discounted the ceasefire, and eventually led to Commandant Quinlan agreeing to the terms of the Katangans. Otherwise, he would have had most of his troops annihilated. In December of that year, A Company returned to Athlone, to this town, marched through the streets, and were treated like heroes. That was not what happened in the higher echelons of the army. They saw the situation differently. Minds were made up by people who were never there. They decided that we were unworthy to be even mentioned. Jadotville was to be written out of the history of the Defence Forces. No officer, NCO or man was ever asked officially what happened. No inquiry was held. Not one member of the company, including our illustrious commander, received any recognition for their bravery and their courage during the fighting at Jadotville during that period in September. As one historian said, A Company and Commandant Quinlan were held out to dry. It was wrong. It was totally wrong. It was unjust. Every effort was made to airbrush the gallant efforts of my comrades here and the deceased members of the actions that they had bravely fought during that period, as I said, in September. Despite the efforts to blot out the history of A Company, some years later, a very brave, courageous, young author named Declan Power wrote a book called The Siege of Jadotville. And suddenly people were aware, what's this story? We never heard about this. The army never did anything like this. So this was the first time people in general had heard. This was followed last year by the film Jadotville, which was produced by Netflix based on Declan Fowler's book, and suddenly an international audience heard about this brave action by a very, very dedicated group of troops representing Ireland in a country called the Congo. This was followed by two other books which should be named: Rose Doyle's book, Heroes of Jadotville, and a man that served with me in the same trench, Sean Foley's book, No White Feather. With their books, more and more people begin to realise there is a story here that hasn't been told, and it's about time it was. So Jadotville started to emerge from the efforts of those who wanted it suppressed. Today has been a wonderful day for all of us. We never dreamed that this day would happen. I'd like to thank most sincerely the Minister for spending the day with us here and for presenting the Jadotville Medal on Bound Jadotville that we never thought we would ever see. So thank you very much, Minister. I would also like to thank the Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Mark Mellett, and the General Staff for their efforts in having this day for us. Thank you very much, Chief of Staff. It's only fitting that we mention a lot of people who spent their years, many years, having this day recognised of the veterans who fought in Jadotville. First, I'd like to mention Pat Quinlan's son, Leo Quinlan, Commandant Leon Quinlan, retired, who gave so much of his time and effort to ensure that his dad and the veterans of A Company would be acknowledged for their bravery during that period in the Congo. And thank you very much. Yeah. I would also like to commend to you my brave and heroic friend, deceased now, Commandant Liam Donnelly, whose submission very early on, some years ago, resulted to the Chief of Staff, resulted in what we now have is a monument just behind us here, recognising the bravery of Commandant Quinlan and the veterans of Jadotville. And his wife, Eileen, is here today to receive his medal. I would also like to thank the United Nations veterans for all their support. Paul Clark, outstanding support, and there is one, again, and the Minister mentioned this, but I will do it anyhow. There's one man here today who must be most proud, the most proud of all of us, to see what happened on this wonderful occasion. He worked tirelessly over the years to ensure that Pat Quinlan and all of the veterans would get the recognition that they deserved. He fought with number 1 platoon under the wonderful leader, Lieutenant Joe Leach, in Jadotville, as a 17-and-a-half-year-old private. I always say to him now, your motto should be never take no for an answer, because he never took no for an answer. And I ask you to put your hands together and recognise years of effort and the fruition of all that effort here today. John Gorman, we salute you. Not to forget his wife, Joan, who also has given tremendous efforts over the years. Thank you, Joan. One group of heroes, true heroes, we always forget for some reason, and that is our wives, our sweethearts, and our families, who were here, particularly in the area of Athlone, Mullingar, Galway, and from other parts of the country, of course, during that awful time when communications were so dreadful, not knowing whether we were ever going to come back alive. I can remember my own sister, Mary, telling me that she was called out of the class by the head teacher and told, "We've very bad news for you, your brother Noel has been killed in the Congo." And even at that time, obituary notices for all of us here and those who have passed on were actually in some of the newspapers. And that was a dreadful time for the families. And I congratulate all the families who have stood by us so loyally over all those years. Thank you very much, everyone. Before I go on to just commenting on those who stood by us in Jadotville during a time of crisis, I would just like to convey my, and I'm sure all the veterans, and I'm sure everybody here, our sincere thanks for my old battalion and for the OC of the 6th Battalion, OC Custom Barracks, for making us feel so welcome here and looking after us so tremendously well. Thank you very much for all those who worked so hard for this day. We shouldn't forget those who were there for us in a time of crisis, as I say, in Jadotville. First of all, I would mention the helicopter pilots, Björn Hovden, Eric Thors, one was Norwegian, the other was Swedish, who flew in a helicopter and almost crash landed, as Sean would say, in top of our trench to bring us in water supplies. Unfortunately, the jerry cans had not been cleaned properly and the water was useless. But they were heroic people who flew in and knew the risks they were taking. So they should be remembered. At the Lufira Bridge, the Fuga jet killed 3 Gurkha troops. Again, it was a United Nations operation. Those Gurkha troops are forgotten now. But we shouldn't forget them, the sacrifice they made. And we should not forget B Company, who tried to relieve us. 15 members of their company were wounded returning from the Lufira Bridge. So our sincere thanks to all the members of B Company for their efforts in trying to relieve us at that time. There's one more person I'd just like to mention, and that is a Wexford man, Charles Carney. He was in Jadotville at the time, gave information to us, later on lost his job, was captured, and almost lost his life. He moved to Zambia later on. Unfortunately, he died there some years ago, always regretting the fact that he never received any honour for the efforts that he made, and that's regrettable, unfortunately, because Charles Carney was a tremendous Irish hero. So now we're coming to the end of what has been an outstanding day, a day that we will remember, veterans anyhow, for the rest of our lives, and I'm sure we'll be able to hand on a very good example to our children, our grandchildren, as to what honour, bravery and courage means. I suppose it's, in one way, it's a happy occasion, but also tinged with a certain amount of sorrow that so many of the veterans, and you know them, we know them, are not here today, and how they would have enjoyed this event. But we know they're here in spirit. And like all old soldiers, they never die, but they only fade away. And as we fade away, we'll remember our gallant Commandant Quinlan, a leader above leaders. We will remember all our veterans. And we can do one thing that it's taken 56 long years to do. We can hold our heads up with pride because A Company have had this honor restored after 56 long years. Thank you very much.
Hold on here. Hold on.
Thank you, Captain Carey.